Hi, this is Amy
and Melissa. We are a couple of retired Texas teachers who are CALTs, Certified Academic Language Therapists. We started our own businesses, and now we have a podcast called The Dyslexia Duo.
So join us for our informative podcast, where we'll delve into dyslexia, covering the topics that affect parents, therapists, teachers, practitioners, and anyone who wants to learn more. We'll guide you through everything you need to know, from the first signs to the intricacies of dyslexia curriculum placement and beyond.
This season, we will cover the referral process, what to expect when your child or student is dyslexic, the generational impacts of dyslexia, and how to support those affected.
Come join us! Let's resume our conversation with the insights of Casey Harrison.
So we had Natalie Wexler on quite a while ago, and she talked a lot about oral language too. And she talked about even going to the grocery store with your child and talking about what you observe and talking about what the child likes and asking them, why would you pick that fruit over this fruit? And, it doesn't have to be anything that's really massive to, plan or do. You just talk to your child, and that builds those oral language skills, which also in turn helps comprehension later down the road. But also, what are some other tips that you might have that parents could do that would kind of build some of those oral language skills on their side?
I love that question. And I agree exactly with what she said. The more that we can, engage our students in the world around them and use that language with them is so important. That trip to the grocery store. Yeah. Like, hey, this is an eggplant. Look, it's purple and green, and we can make, it's a vegetable, and let's buy one. Let's take it home. Let's see what it is. There's lots of things you can do like that. The other thing is, don't be afraid to use academic language with your students, even your little students. Sometimes I will see people prolonging like baby talk with their kids, or thinking that they can't use academic language with their students. And you can. If your little 5-year-old can rattle off every dinosaur name, you are good to go. You can use all those words. And it just becomes part of their language. My little one, she loves to try to use big words, and she does all the time. People comment all the time. They're like, oh my gosh, she's like talking to a grown-up. And well, she's been with me all the time. I used to bring her to the center, but she, she will use words like, oh, precisely, or, today she was asking me about words, and we can model the use of those words and use the academic language or the higher, vocabulary word, and then right behind it follow with like your everyday words so that they can start to make that connection. Reading out loud, picture books. There's so much power behind picture books. The vocabulary used in picture books is going to be a higher level usage. And so I think that is also something for parents to read out loud to their kids, those picture books, teachers to read picture books. I used to read picture books with my 5th and 6th graders. There are some beautiful picture books that really address higher level content that are completely appropriate for middle school and high school students. So,
and they may not have had that opportunity to enjoy it because maybe they weren't identified till later, and they were introduced to the books, but they were expected to be able to read it on their own or something along those lines. And so, yeah, I totally agree with you. And I've said that to many a person who has questioned the use of some of the books that we have. And I'm like, they're in a safe environment in your room with other kids their age who are going to experience these books. You've got to provide them the buy-in. If you're showing that you're enjoying it and you don't think it's babyish, then eventually the other kids are going to not have that behavior or that attitude as well.
But you can also use picture books. There's some really beautiful ones that deal with higher grade level material, like Mercedes and the Chocolate Pilot is a beautiful picture book about the Berlin.
I don't know that one.
It's about the Berlin airlift. And it's a true story. And I do a theme, and I pair that with Gleam and Glow, which is about the Bosnian War. You wouldn't read those to your first graders. Those are for my older students. They deal with war and sacrifice and death and things like that, but they're beautiful picture books to read. And then there's another one, the Sukiyari story, which is about the Japanese, I think he was a diplomat that was in Poland, and he was writing visas for the Jewish people to get out of the country as fast as he could. And he ended up being punished by his government. And so there are these picture books out there that are really very powerful, and you can use them to teach theme while you're also really lifting up vocabulary and oral.
I love that. I love that. Maybe email us those titles later and we'll put them as a reference point on our show notes. I think that would be great because I hear that from secondary teachers, therapists, whatever, saying, oh, I think that book may be just too baby for them. And I'm like, well, no, one, have the buy-in, but two, I love the additional resources that you're talking about. I think that would be great. And then you made me think about something about using those higher level words. And I think this just illustrates who our dyslexic kids are. I can remember a long, long time ago, we would be doing handwriting practice in a dyslexia setting. I don't think I was a therapist yet. And we'd be doing handwriting and then we'd go to like spelling. And so the kids would always say the same thing. Does this have to be perfect handwriting? And I'd always say, no, it just has to be legible. I don't want perfection for a spelling test. And so I can remember one of my students, and she's in her 30s now, and she's a speech teacher of all things. One of the kids goes, Miss R, does this have to be perfect handwriting? And she goes, no, it just has to be edible. Such are dyslexic kids.
That is. Yes. My daughter, I need to have her tested because her reading is okay, but her spelling that's where I'm seeing it. It's bad, but she cannot say dyslexia. She calls dyslexia. Mommy, are you going to the dyslexia center? And I'm like, yes, I'm going to the dyslexia center. And that's another thing as parents, when your child says it the wrong way, it is adorable, but just restate it the proper way so that they hear that. She also says things like restaurant. She cannot say specific words. So,
oh no.
I've had parents where I've told them we're about to start working on X, Y, and Z sound. You might want to record how they're saying this now because it's going to change. And they're like, oh, okay. And they record them saying the few words that they love. And then, of course, it changed. So,
yep.
That's cool. That's a good idea, Melissa.
It is.
Okay, so Casey, I loved that in your book you talked about the contradictory parts of dyslexia. And I've always kind of touted it as, myths about dyslexia, but I love that wording that you used about it, the contradictory parts of dyslexia. Can you explain that a little further for our audience?
Yeah. So we're thinking about dyslexia, and we often focus on those components that are challenging. And the student understands that they're having a hard time, but we may also see that they may excel at specific things. So, this deeper understanding of dyslexia and this individual learning profile can really shift when we are sitting there thinking, gosh, I have a student who's in all honors classes. They certainly can't be dyslexic. Yes, they can. Right? Mm-hmm. Or, hey, this student is in AP classes. They don't need accommodations. Well, that's not true either. So those can feel really contradictory. For our kids, it can also feel very contradictory because they're being told like, oh my gosh, you are so smart. Like you know all this information. You're doing so great. And then when they go to write all that information down, it just falls apart. Yeah. Right? It can feel like really like differing messages that they have. It may also look like, oh my gosh, well, the student, is sitting in honors English, but they need more time to finish the writing. Or just kind of having these sort of like juxtapositions that our students have, particularly our students who may have dyslexia and also be gifted, or, those 2E students, it can feel really hard for them. I have, students that are clearly very intelligent or speaking in a very eloquent manner. And then when you get their writing, there is like very simplified language used, maybe shortened sentences, and this big discrepancy that we see for our students.
And you're making me think, I actually kind of went two different ways with this. When I was still in the public ed system and we do the K1 screeners, and then we sit down and evaluate that data, so many of the teachers were just looking for the red, the warning signs. And I'm like, well, we got to go beyond just what's on this screener. Let's look at history, let's look at grades and see, because they're like, oh, I thought he'd be one, but everything's turning out green. Well, this could be that 2E student that can figure out these things, but how long did it take him, or how many times did he change his answer on that screener? And then conversely, when kids do state assessments, they're like, well, they pass the state assessment all the time. Yeah, but how long did it take him to get through this? How difficult was it for him?
Or they respond really quickly to the remediation.
Mm-hmm.
They go quickly through the program. And I imagine that must be very difficult on their psyche too, to know that they've got this ability and they really just can't get it out. I would imagine that would be very hard for them to deal with that contradiction.
Yeah. And from my experience, that's where I see a lot of the anxiety and some of those other impacts, those cascading secondary impacts of dyslexia that rest on sort of like that mental, social, emotional component, where they may be brilliant and you can see how brilliant they are and they're failing all their classes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Or they're talking to me about this examination of Julius Caesar that they read, and they eloquently are able to tell me, and yet they just take an incomplete on any assignments that go along with it, because it's just overwhelming for them to even get to the point of starting those assignments.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of where I think what I see is those contradictory pieces lead to the misunderstanding of, well, they're just being lazy, or they just need to try harder.
Right.
Yeah.
When in reality, if we dig down deeper and we find where that breakdown's occurring, then we can provide those supports.
Perfect.
Casey, I love all your neat little activity books and materials. I talked to you about that when I saw you recently. I've been using them.
Oh, yes.
I love them. Letter confusion activities. Okay, so you've made these for educators. Parents can use them. Can you describe the key components and the skills you're trying to promote with their usage for our listeners?
Yeah, I love that. So one of the things that I realized, as I was working more and more with students and deepening my own understanding of dyslexia and the dyslexia continuum, as well as, coexisting learning differences. And I started to really be very curious. I'm a very curious person. And so I started to be really curious about like the cognitive science research and retrieval practices and working memory and learning. And I recognized that some of my students really needed more opportunities to apply the concepts and skills that we were targeting in our lessons. And they also needed maybe more intentional scaffolding opportunities and more supports. And at the center, because I tend to work one-on-one with students, I have a lot of students that have coexisting disabilities, whether they have autism or, autism and dyslexia, or ADHD and dyslexia. Sometimes we just needed to have some more supports. And so out of that, really, I created materials to help support my students within my dyslexia therapy sessions. And so that's really kind of how that came about. And so it was really tailored to the students. Honestly, like that's one of my favorite things about being a therapist is in the moment, like really observing what the student needs at that moment and adapting for that student. So if you ever are following me like on social media and you're looking, you're like, oh my gosh, this looks like she just drew it on an index card. I did. That is how it started. And so then I realized like, hey, this worked really well for the students. And then I'll turn that into a resource that I share with others. So
That's brilliant. It doesn't have to be anything major. It's brilliant.
the B&D reversal chart. I've actually used that with several of my students, and I have noticed a marked difference in the way that they read those B's and D's. And this one student I have, when she does the ARD decks, she is recognizing the B, the D. She's saying it more consistently the correct way. When she goes into text, it's a lot better. It's not 100% yet, but it's a lot better than what it was. So I'm like so thankful that you created that, because it takes people like you to help people like me that aren't creative to come up with ideas like that, to really help us out here with the kids and make a difference for them. So I have one other question, kind of a follow-up. Do they follow a particular curriculum scope and sequence, or?
That's a good question. So I have students that are in multiple programs.
Mm-hmm.
So while I teach a particular program most of the time, that is like my favorite one, and I teach that one, there are other students that are in other programs. And so I want to match where the student is. So what I tend to do, I do have some that are kind of like more of a general scope and sequence, like my spin and read activities and my spin and spell follow like what would be considered your traditional or general scope and sequence for your dyslexia therapy. But in any of them, you can put in with whatever program you're using, whether you're whatever Orton Gillingham based program.
And then I have one more question.
Yeah.
Do you want to make some data charts for it?
What kind of data charts do you want to make? We can definitely do that. Yeah.
That's funny.
I do have some little like data charts that I keep for the students to sort of track like their rapid automatic naming charts and things like that. But we can chat, and I like to make all those things up.
Well, I figured you were probably a data person too, and I am totally a data person. And I kept track of the timing that they did that rapid thing, but I feel like I need more. I need more data.
Yes, I have some charts I can definitely give you for those. Yeah, I love keeping data too. And I love also noting observations. And Amy, you had mentioned this when you were talking about, your teachers looking at like the specific data on like those reading screeners and like honing in on, oh, well, I guess, they're not in the red. But I think we have to also really remember that there's power in observation, and that our teachers and our therapists, you are a wealth of knowledge, and what you're observing with that student is important as well. And we have to find a way to marry the two, the data and the observations. And your observations are going to be key in providing appropriate scaffolding or adaptations that are needed for that student. So I don't want educators to kind of like be like, well, I saw it, but the data says, there's power in the things we're observing.
And being able to report it back to the parents. I took a progress monitoring on a student yesterday, and it looked like she didn't make any gains. But in reality, she had also just come from a spend the night field trip. And I was surprised that she kind of maintained, because she did really, really well on that. Those are things that we need to convey to the parent, hey, imagine what she could have done if she wasn't tired, basically. That's something I observed. I've watched her stumble over this word where she didn't stumble over this particular letter combination before, or that's not a typical stumbling block for her.
Learning isn't constantly up. It's up and it's down.
It ebbs and flows. It's peaks and valleys, for sure.
It does. And I think, when we're working with students with dyslexia, one of the things we have to remember is that we are going to have that ebb and flow, but also that our students are going to make sometimes that progress. It is not going to look like by the end of the year, perhaps, or by this time, like automatically you're on grade level, go. Sometimes that progression is going to be a little bit slower, and then it tends to speed up. Like how, Melissa, you were saying at the beginning, like, gosh, that first year, sometimes it's like slow go. And you're making these small steps and making parents aware of the progress that we're making students aware of the progress we're making. And then you're right, they do kind of tend to do these leaps and bounds come that second year where things are just like clicking together. But I think if we aren't able to communicate that to parents, it can feel like, oh my gosh, we are just like a turtle here.
Mm-hmm.
But instead of, the Orton Gillingham saying we go as fast as we can and as slow as we need to, like that really needs to be understood.
So you had talked a little bit about accommodations earlier in the pod, and we know that ADHD is the most typical comorbidity that occurs with dyslexia. Dyslexia seldom walks alone. It always brings a friend along for the ride. But typically we see ADHD like up to 40%. I've heard someplace say maybe higher, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't imagine. But what would be some suggestions that you might have for students with dyslexia, even like from elementary all the way into like working adult at your job? And we know that everybody exists on a spectrum. So maybe some people could use these. Some people wouldn't find it necessary. What would be your thoughts on accommodations that could be used?
Yeah, that overlap of ADHD and dyslexia really is fairly prevalent. I've seen ranges from 25 to 50, like depending on the research that you're referencing. Yeah. I think as therapists, right, we see when a student may have that coexisting learning difference. And for us, then we can be really mindful as to providing that instructional and environmental support to aid in attention and memory within the lessons. So one of the things that I love about structured literacy, Orton Gillingham, is that a lot of the strategies for student success in learning are part of the guiding principles and the essential elements. So many of our programs include visual schedules, which are going to be great for supporting our students with ADHD, as it can really help them organize time and build in some of those executive function skills. Some of my students, I make them even like an individual visual schedule. It's just on a little index card. I told you guys I like to just make it right there. So we do a little index card, and they have a little box behind each of the components of the lesson, and they will color it in. And some of my students who have the particular kind of ADHD where they really like to share lots of information and they want to like interject things into the lesson, what I've done is I've built in a tell time. So behind particular elements or components of the lesson, they will have a tell time, and it's like a 1 minute tell me what you want to tell me time. So if I have a student who will want to tell me something and they're like, oh, this new Minecraft game. And I'm like, that's awesome. I want to hear all about it at your tell time. And then I am going to remember that when their tell time comes up, I'm like, hey, what do you want to tell me about that Minecraft? And they're like, oh yeah. Right. And so they'll tell me what they want to. You can also adjust it and have that tell time be a stand and stretch time. It's just a 1 minute block. I work it into my lesson where it's where I would naturally be transitioning to another task. It's not a big deal.
That is super smart. What a great idea.
And so it doesn't take away from the time. It's the time that they've been sitting there anyways, when you're like, okay, come back. So that's their tell time. Yeah. So just purposely planning those short 1 minute times can be really strategic, and that natural break in the lesson can be really beneficial. I use the little timers, for my students, and for some of my students, they even need a timer, like a 2 minute timer for alphabet, a 3 minute timer for deck, like they will, whatever they're trying to do. It just sort of depends. You have to adjust for your student as well. Right. For my older students with dyslexia and ADHD, I find that embedding opportunities for them to follow a written schedule, to help them with a written schedule, with the planning, looking at a calendar is really beneficial, so that they can start to monitor their own work and their assignments, kind of building in some of those executive function pieces that they need, those organization strategies. And then helping them kind of determine important aspects of the lesson or assignments can really be beneficial and help them transfer that skill into their classwork. It really just kind of depends on how much the ADHD is impacting their learning, in what way, and where you want to put those adjustments in.
Very good. Thank you.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. Hi, this is Melissa with Kids First Dyslexia Services. I am excited to share with you my private practice. Kids First Dyslexia Services is a private practice that specializes in dyslexia therapy. Each one-on-one session focuses on instruction specific to your child's needs in a nurturing environment that develops self-esteem, builds confidence, and fosters a sense of accomplishment, resulting in happier kids with higher levels of achievement. We provide a professional, personalized experience, always putting the child first. We value the relationships with both our students and parents because strengthening skills and overcoming hurdles to achieve desired goals and success is a team effort. For more information, please visit www.kidsfirstdyslexia.com. That is www.kidsfirstdyslexia.com.
Hi, this is Amy Rodenroth, and as part of the Dyslexia Duo podcast team and owner of Discovery Dyslexia Services, I want to talk to you about my business. Our CALT trained team offers expert virtual or in-person therapy located in Prosper, Texas, using proven dyslexia curricula like Take Flight, Build, MTA, Alphabetic Phonics, and Reading by Design. We also provide crucial independent evaluations and advocacy services. Don't wait. Empower your child today. Visit www.discovereed.com to learn more. That again is www.discoveread.com. Discovereed, covering all your dyslexia needs. Let's return to the show.
What are some ways that parents can support their dyslexic student outside of school?
I say lift them up and help them find those other areas that they shine. I do. I think that that's actually a really important part of it. Dyslexia cannot be like the only shirt you wear. You have got to know what are those other areas that light you up, that make you who you are. We are not solely dyslexia. We are all of the things together. And like I said previously, we all have areas that we're working on, which I call areas that we're going to grow. And we all have areas that we do really well, where we can glow. And so we want to balance those out. We want to let the students know, hey, this is an area that you glow, whether that is trapeze or horse riding or football or art, whatever it is, right? Making sure our students have that opportunity as well to foster those hobbies and skills beyond the academics. And then also setting aside time to practice those things that are a little bit harder. So,
I really like the terms glow and grow.
yes,
That is such a great idea because it brings out that visual of they can glow, they can actually light up in the area of their interest and what they're successful at. And then they know that they can grow, that they can succeed in this other area with the proper instruction. If they put in the effort, they can grow as well. I love that.
I love that too, but it made me think of Friends when they were reading that book about female emancipation. I'm not going to go into it right now, but it made me think of that.
I don't remember that.
Oh, I'll talk about it later. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about some of the secondary difficulties that could accompany dyslexia. We all understand phonological awareness, and there doesn't have to necessarily be a deficit of phonological awareness. You could see a deficit still occur in decoding and fluency, but what are some of the secondary characteristics of dyslexia that you may or may not see, because they exist on that continuum, that you may or may not see with your dyslexic students?
Yeah. So some of those secondary pieces, as you said, like that reading comprehension, that is one where, our students who maybe have kind of flown under the radar, maybe don't get a diagnosis until like 7th grade, high school, right? Those kiddos have been working so hard. They are incredibly smart that they have really kind of tricked everybody along the way, but they may need more support in some of those multisyllabic word reading. I also think that coming back to morphology for them is going to be really important to aid in that reading comprehension. Also coming back to and analyzing, like, how is their language? If we're looking at that reading comprehension, how are they understanding language just in conversation, oral stories that they're listening to, things like that. Yes, that written comprehension or written expression is one that can be really tricky for our kids in secondary, especially as they're required to write more and more as responses to things that they've been reading. Or a lot of my students, they have to annotate, and then they have to, find quotes in their book, and then they have to add those quotes at the end. For my older kids, I always ask them to ask the teacher before they even start reading the book, like, is there a written assignment that goes along with this? And am I going to need to cite and add quotes? Because I don't know how many times I've had my students and they have read that whole book and they didn't look for a theme. They didn't find any quotes. And then come the essay and the teacher's like, okay, you need to write your thesis statement and you need to have 5 to 6 quotes from the story that support your thesis statement. And that is torture for them to go back in and try to find it. So if they can get in a habit of tabbing quotes along the way, and if they know what that assignment's going to be ahead of time, or that they need to be looking for a certain number of citations that they're going to have to reference, things like that, that can be really helpful for our students. The other thing that I think sometimes gets overlooked for our kids is writing fluency and typing fluency. What I have seen kind of as a trend is that schools are really trying to meet the needs of kids. And so they're providing them with technology, and the kids are given a Chromebook or something along those lines. And that can be supportive. But when my students are still hunting and pecking on the typing, that's not benefiting them. And so we have to also take into consideration, what is their typing fluency? Because it needs to be about 20 words a minute to really actually be beneficial for them. So there's a lot that goes into each of these pieces if we really want to dig down. And then in my book, I talk about the dyslexia iceberg and, all the things that we've talked about, like that we see on top of the surface, right? All those academic components and things like that. But there's so much that resides below the surface, from shame to anxiety to depression, where they are just kind of feeling lost. And those parts are really lasting. I think if you talk to adults with dyslexia, yes, they talk about the academic component, but that thread of that emotional impact is lasting and deep. And for our older students, I think that's where we really start to see that, where they may act out, they may have avoidance behaviors, they may not want to go to school, they may drop out. We know that pipeline to prison percentage is real. If you look at the number of students in juvie, yes, self-harm. So there's a lot of things that are really important for us to be aware of that exist beyond the academics.
You had mentioned the technology piece, and I had written down 20 words per minute, and I thought, okay, that's a good number to put out there. So many, not just teachers, but parents, they always go, oh, my child's so tech savvy, and they just assume that they can type. And I've watched many a student just do what you're saying, right? Like that, taking their pointer finger and typing. And I'm like, that's not effective nor fluent. Right. They have to be taught keyboarding skill. It has to be explicitly taught. And any of the Microsoft Suite stuff, just because they can play Roblox or whatever on the computer, I don't know, my kids are all grown up. Just because they can do that doesn't necessarily mean that they're technology savvy with the technical pieces on a computer.
Yeah, I think we have so many conversations about automaticity and handwriting, and we know the value of that. And we know, we're looking for fluent automatic handwriting, and we have like the letters per minute we want to have as our target zone and all that. We also need to look at copying rate.
Right.
But that's also something that is required of a lot of our students. And for some students, that's a no-go. And other students, we can build that skill. But just as we have this handwriting fluency, we need to also think about that typing fluency, because it's the same outcome. If we are really slow and laborious in our handwriting, we lose our train of thought, and we're going to simplify what we're writing. If we are hunting and pecking on the keyboard, again, we are going to lose our train of thought. We're going to be tired. We are not going to have efficient output in written form. And so if we kind of think along those terms, there is a great deal of importance in ensuring that our kids are proficient in handwriting and in typing.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We recently had on our friend that we met at IDA, and it's Mary McFarland. And she was talking all about morphology and has a morphology toolkit. And we know how morphology is a critical component of all instruction. But what are some of your favorite ways to incorporate morphological instruction?
I love morphology, and I'm actually really glad I'm starting to see more and more conversations regarding morphological awareness, because one of the things I think that has been a myth for so long in education is that morphology is only for older kids.
Yes, I agree.
And we can start to bring in awareness of morphology really young. I work on like suffix S with my kindergartners. And it's the cutest thing. They're like, oh, look, there's a suffix S. And they circle the suffix S, but it's really important. And at those younger grades, you also want to pay attention to their use of those morphological elements in speech. When you have your students that's like, oh, I jumped rope today. They have an awareness that there's something about that ED that's indicating it happened already, but they're not quite at that point of really having a deep enough understanding of that different sound tense that goes with it. So we can be really intentional in integrating morphology early on, and then really bringing morphological elements into all of our aspects of education, especially with our older kids, right? When I'm looking at biology, good man, that's a great opportunity in my biology classes for us to dig into some morphology, right? Like break it down for the kids. It will be so much more meaningful for them, and it starts to make sense. We've taken Latin out of our schools, and with that went a lot of roots and understanding about, how things come together, how those word elements come together for meaning. And so I think if we can be really intentional and mindful about how we're embedding morphology into all of our areas of curriculum, that it will just benefit our students so much.
And what I notice is that a lot of districts will stop a dyslexia curricula once they get to the Greek and Latin layer. And it makes me a little crazy, because if you think those first few books are all Anglo-Saxon. And so what is the Anglo-Saxon layer of English? Is 20 to 25%. 60% is that Greek and Latin layer. Why would we drop that? You do have a decoding piece. It's more transparent because it's Greek and Latin, but you want it for that academic level of support. And it just kind of kills me a little bit when I hear districts are not, like, okay, they're done. They can decode now. Well, no, there's more to this.
There really is. And once you get into those later books that really dig into, Latin roots and Greek combining forms, you are expanding that academic vocabulary by leaps and bounds. You are helping with multisyllabic word reading and spelling. And for your multi-language learners, particularly those learners that are Spanish speakers, those cognates in Latin are a lot. And when I would get to those parts with my Spanish, because they're like, oh, and they're like, this is so easy. They would know it. And they already had in their native language a word that they could link it to. And now they had this academic language in English that they could link it to. And that was really powerful. And we started to see that transfer over into their writing, where now they were using these academic English words because they had this deep, rich understanding of what that word meant.
That's amazing.
I guess I have a question for you. The only thing I've noticed when I'm teaching the Greek and Latin roots is that, so when we're into the ologies, I've noticed a lot of times the students do have a hard time with still sounding out the ology because they've got to remember, okay, this is an unaccented syllable. It's going to say the accent, those types of things. What kind of tips do you have for that? Where are you feeling like they maybe missed something along the way that they needed to review more, or is it just natural, a part of the developmental process?
One of the things I love about morphology is that as we're starting to put morphemes together, our students really have to flex the vowel variants. So I draw this little flexing arm and I have all the vowels on it. And I'm like, oh, let's flex that vowel. And so, because that is what they're really doing, they're starting to make these shifts in pronunciation, even with the same root, based on, how it sounds. And so they have to be they're heightening their awareness of that vowel variant that occurs in our language. And I think that that's so powerful for them. So that's just something I just remind them hey, let's flex that vowel. What else could it be? And just to kind of bring that back and highlight.
Because that's kind of one of the most challenging parts. When they get to that higher level, that is one of the more challenging parts, is flexing the vowels. I like the terminology, flexing the vowels. That's really
Well, and that's one of those things, you can always tell if someone learned a word by reading it versus hearing it. Right. So I always say that, when I read Harry Potter, it was way before the movies had come out, and I did not read Hermione's name that way through the whole book series until I heard it. And I'm like, oh, whoops. So, but it's because it was not a name I was familiar with. And when your kids, especially when they're starting to read those Greek and Latin, the Latin roots and Greek and combining forms, they're coming across words. They're like, I don't know what that word is. I've never heard it before. And you're like, yeah, that's right. And so they're not able to reside on that phonological lexicon because it's not there. We're building that phonological lexicon as we're building that reading lexicon. And so it's really powerful.
And it kind of goes back to how important vocabulary is as well. Because when they do need to flex the vowels, if they do have a vocabulary word that's very similar to something that they're practicing, they can get enough of the sounds and they're like, oh yes, I remember this. This was ology. Okay. And then they pull through and they can get the rest of the word. And that just kind of builds up that memory for them as well.
In my household, when we say a word out loud, my husband and I will sit there. If it's a word we don't use very often, we'll question each other. And I'll say, I don't think that's how that's pronounced. And we're like, oh, well, I've only seen it in writing. I've never heard it out loud. Kind of like Hermione Granger.
That's right. That's right. Well, and I love that the dictionaries now have a little pronunciation.
Yeah, we pull it out all the time. Yeah. Great. Well, we're getting kind of towards the end of our session together, and this has been great. And you're such a great therapist. You're such a great speaker and very influential. What would be some good books that you would, or articles or websites, or in addition to your own books, which we're going to promote heavily on our pod, but what are some additional resources or authors or books that you get inspired by?
Oh my gosh, there's so many. I have a stack of books that are in my still to read books and favorite books. I think if you're starting out on your dyslexia journey, I always recommend Overcoming Dyslexia. My favorite one. It's just such a wealth of knowledge, and I hold, Sally Shaywitz in the highest regard in terms of just what she's done for bringing awareness of dyslexia to so many people. The other book that I've really enjoyed is The Essentials of Dyslexia Assessment and Intervention. The second edition, I think, is really accessible for people. It is by Nancy Mather and Barbara Wendling. I just think the readability of it is really nice.
Yeah.
And then there are a couple articles. I mean, it's funny because my trainees, I have like a Padlet. I like inundate them with articles, but because I love reading articles. But there are a couple that I think are really pertinent to our conversation. And one is by Marianne Wolf. And I know you just had her on recently, but her article, Towards a Dynamic Comprehensive Conceptualization of Dyslexia, I think is a really good read for therapists, practitioners, teachers. Depending on kind of where you're jumping into the journey of dyslexia, you'll take different things away from that article. But I think that is a really good one to read. And then another one, I really enjoy articles from Dr. Truckenmeyer. She's from Michigan State University. She has an article out. I think this is a great one to share with educators and parents. It is titled New and Not Well-Known Research About Reading Disabilities Teachers Want to Know. That's a nice one. It breaks out specific learning disabilities, talks about dyslexia, DLD, developmental language disorder, which in my prediction as a therapist, I think we are going to start to hear more and more conversations about the overlap of DLD and dyslexia. So that's my
I just heard some research about that recently. I don't have the percentages right in front of me, so I don't want to say anything about it, but I just heard about percentages are pretty. It's
about 50% high. Yeah, it's high. And I see that in my students. And when I'm looking at their student profile, I can see like, oh yeah, we are also having some language comprehension stuff going on.
Mm-hmm,
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Okay. So here's the magic question. And where's my magic sound? I don't have it yet.
Make it up sounds.
Okay. So if you had one wish to grant our students, what would it be and why?
I would love for our students to recognize how wonderful they are just as they are as human beings, and to know that they are not alone in their journey with dyslexia, that they have people here to support them and walk beside them and walk with them, and that they're not alone and they're beautiful just the way they are.
I love it. Thank you.
That's great. Well, Casey, it's been wonderful. So glad we connected. So glad we connected.
I know. I'm so glad too.
No, and I think we've been working on trying to get you on the show since July.
It's been a long time.
It's been a long time. I was looking back through the emails going, well, that is a while. But we're so glad that you came on to join us today. It's been great. Where are you going to be the next few months? Do you have any speaking engagements you want to promote?
I will be at the ALTA conference. I will have a booth there. I'm not going to be speaking there, but I'll be there. I'll have some books there and all that fun stuff. And then this summer, I will be at the Region 10 Dyslexia Conference. And then I have a big surprise conference session in October. So,
are you at the IDA in October?
Well, I don't know if I'm going to be at IDA yet in October, but I do have another one in October that is
another surprise.
One. Yeah. So,
wow.
And I do have some like different articles in like Distinct Magazine and on EdView 360, Voyager Sopris, that I can link as well if those are of interest.
That would be wonderful. That'd be wonderful. Okay. So
now that we are friends, though, we're friends. You've been on our podcast. We've sat next to each other at booths. Maybe we could get some information about this secret place you're going to be in October. And we could be there too.
You'll be able to. It's going to be online, but I'm excited about it. So.
Okay.
Nice.
Yay.
Nice. So this is Amy.
And Melissa.
And we're the Dyslexia Duo. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
The Dyslexia Duo podcast hosts are Amy Rodenroth,
Melissa Dean.
Our producer is Greg Rodenroth.
You can find us on Facebook at The Dyslexia Duo.
Email us any questions or comments at thedyslexiaduo@gmail.com. studentswithdyslexia.com.
Awareness is so important. Share this podcast with your friends,
Family,
and teachers.
thanks for joining us.
Bye.